Welcome to the Police Accountability Report on the Real News Network. Today, we take a deep dive into an aspect of policing that is often overlooked, how the country's massive law enforcement complex affects the psyche of a community, and what are the unseen consequences for cities that have bet heavily on policing to solve complex social problems. We will also take a look at how the media bolsters the power of policing by exploring this body cam footage. News organizations build it as an officer's life on the line, but never questioned exactly why this encounter happened in the first place. A telling example of how we, the people who report on the behavior of cops, can sometimes omit critical facts, omissions that fail to raise essential questions. My fellow reporter Stephen Janis can elaborate.
Well, yeah, I mean, Tay, as we've talked about many times on this show, and as we talk about and sometimes debate, and we debate this, one thing that's never really recognized is how policing infiltrates every aspect of our lives, especially in cities like Baltimore, where it is the largest and predominant institution, both through funding and I think in a sense, cultural representation. And often in these stories, we fail to provide a context as to why police have so much power and how that power really affects us psychologically and in our civic discussions.
So to talk about this, we're going to focus on a small raid on a business in Baltimore and what it tells us about how policing can be so dominant in the psyche of a city that it becomes, in a sense, pervasive to the point that we don't understand how it influences our thinking.
And why this story came to our attention today, and what was interesting about it was that, it was an effort by the person who's joining us, Sean Weston, to just open a business and maintain a business. And it became this focal point for police activity and pushback from the community, which I think is illustrative of the idea that we were talking about before.
Now, when we first encountered Sean, when he was trying to open what he said was a community center in Northwest Baltimore, it was his way of giving back to the neighborhood where he had done business for nearly 3 decades. But his plan received pushback from the community, and shortly thereafter, one of his businesses was raided by police, and his son was arrested. But what made this raid so extraordinary is that it wasn't the first time. And to tell that story, we're going to play a video we put together about what happened, and then talk to Sean, who's joining us in the studio.
The story starts with the tale of a Black business owner, Sean Weston, and how his dream of expanding his business to give back to the city of Baltimore has been met with obstacles, both from law enforcement and the community itself. Barriers which raise uncomfortable questions about how a city struggling with crime and poverty can right itself. And what happens when a community that invests heavily in punishment tries to grow and thrive when punishment no longer works?
It's all of you, but I've been just going through this repeated raids over and over through the course of the years.
Because this story starts with a man who knows quite a bit about how the city inflicts pain upon the people who work here. We got in contact with Sean after police raided his business in March. A group of plainclothes officers ransacked the store and charged his son with intent to distribute morphine. But Sean said the raid was a familiar story for him because this is not the first time police have raided his business. In fact, it has been an ongoing struggle that he says is due in part because he's Black.
That's the only thing that makes me different, because other vendors are selling these products throughout the whole city, throughout the whole country. You can order this stuff anywhere online.
In the charging documents obtained by The Real News, police allege Sean's son was selling morphine, which was not true.
While the products
and they also accused
legal,
him of hawking paraphernalia, like these vials and a sweetener known as mannitol. Weston acknowledges the items he sells can be misused, but he points to a sign that clearly discourages it in his store, and he notes the same goods are sold all over the city, which is why Weston thinks he's being targeted.
So, Sean, let me ask you a question that is probably on a lot of people's minds.
While the products you sell are legal, and they are sold in other stores in Baltimore, as Stephen and I confirmed, they are still tools of the drug trade and can be used for illicit purposes.
How do you justify this?
Well, there's no way to justify what a person chooses to do once he leaves my establishment. All I could do is just put up precautions to protect myself and my employees.
Right.
And that's by understanding the law and posting signs stating that my products are not sold for any illegal use. And that's about the most I can do. But what a person chooses to do with these products once they leave my establishment, I have no control over that.
Absolutely. It's as if I went and bought a ski mask from a ski mask store and I decide to go rob a bank with it. Is it the ski mask store fault that I decide to use it in this criminal way? It's a worthwhile point that you're making. Now, Stephen, you actually went to talk to State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby about the raid that we saw that Sean discussed with us. What did her office have to say about this?
Well, as we know, and as we mentioned in the package, you know, Sean's son was charged with distributing large quantities of morphine. I mean, you know, real weight. But it turns out after a lab test that it was not morphine. So they just dropped all the charges summarily. Now, that didn't stop them from confiscating stuff out of your store or taking money out of the drawer. And I would be curious to know, since this has been announced and since the state's attorney has said there was no drugs, has your stuff been returned to you?
No, no.
So what were the losses for you?
I mean, I've lost about, I would say at least well over $10,000 worth of merchandise.
Wow.
And they took some cash too, right?
It was, the cash, it was probably $400 to $500, but they also took cash from out of my son's book bag, which was his personal money. And he hasn't received that back either. Again, no one has contacted me. I don't know if they contacted my attorney, but I haven't gotten anything back up to this point.
Sean, let me ask you a question, and I know this is sort of speculation, but do you think the officers actually thought it was morphine that they found in your store? Do you really think they thought that?
From what my son told me, they were high-fiving and
right.
and
taking pictures, I noticed, in the raid video.
And congratulating each other on we finally got Sean, which, you know, I couldn't, you know, it got me on what? You know, I don't do anything other than, you know, work and run my business.
So let me follow up with you on this. Your store has been raided in the past. Talk to me a little bit about these other raids and what happened.
Most of the raids took place during the late 90s and early 2000s, in which it was a series of officers that, I guess, focused on our store. At the time, we were young African-American males who, you know, were making a nice amount of money, and we were being flashy with our money, with the cars and jewelry and things of that sort, and I guess that's what drew that attention to us. But again, once they started investigating and there were no drugs, anything, I guess they started focusing on what we were selling out of our store.
So tell me a little bit about the community center that you proposed. What is it supposed to be? What is it supposed to give back to the neighborhood?
Well, it's supposed to give back opportunity, you know, for young guys to maybe get a job, you know, give them something positive, you know, something structural that they can do in their own community. You know, that's the whole purpose. It's supposed to give safe haven. You know, if any problems going on in the community, they can come there and discuss it and talk it out. It's supposed to give seniors, you know, opportunity to get into workshops, learn some new dishes to cook, you know. But again, you know, we were stopped from doing this.
Now, what's interesting, Stephen, is you actually attended one of these community meetings. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what happened there.
Well, you know, Sean, one of the things that was interesting that we had been talking over time, and he said that the community association, which Baltimore has a ton of community associations, wouldn't talk to him and wouldn't discuss it, but also opposed it. So it was creating problems because he was getting visits from, you know, inspectors and fire inspectors at odd hours. And so I went to cover the meeting because I thought, okay, Sean was going to go and explain to the community and try to make his case. And I went, and the minute I show up, they're like, you can't be here. You need to leave. You can't tape it. You can't record it. You can't do anything. It was very hostile, which is really unusual. I've covered a lot of community meetings. Community meetings tend to be open to the public. But I think, and Sean can explain this to you better, but then suddenly in the middle of a community meeting, I would say there was a bit of an argument, and it really struck me as generational. The community association was mostly senior citizens, and Sean's supporters are mostly young. And I think Sean can tell you about it a little bit more, but it was an interesting dynamic to see the young people saying, you know, why aren't you listening to us?
We the future of this community. So for somebody to call me a punk, and
They call you a punk?
yeah, I was called a punk by the president. That's my first time meeting her. She said, I don't want to talk to you, punk.
I'm opposed to it because it sounds like it could be a lot of things, but it kind of maybe doesn't have, as they say, doesn't have the element that people are saying, but it sounds like something that could easily invite the element. And by the element, I do mean the drugs.
Now, Sean, you also talked about how the police sent you a warning that fire inspectors were sent to your place of business. Can you tell me a little bit about why you thought this was a warning and what happened?
Well, fire inspectors showed up, you know, at the restaurant, you know, at the time I was trying to turn into the community center. I showed up on a Sunday, which was just a surprise to me.
It's pretty late, right? Like,
yeah, in the evening, around 5 in the evening. Okay. In which he showed up, and the way he showed up kind of hostile. Okay. In a way, and, you know, again, I tried to, you know, talk to him, in which I told him, hey, look, come on in, let me invite you in. Because obviously you guys trying to get in here to see what's going on. And I really wanted them to see what I was doing inside. And as I walked them in and I started talking to them and showing them what exactly what was going on in there. And at the time, I did not know where all this trouble was coming from. Right. Okay, I'm still not 100% sure where it's coming from, but I kept telling him, you know, the cops sending you up here, you know, why you bother me when I'm trying to get in compliance. And again, we just started talking, and he told me that his boss or supervisor was coming up there to take a look.
Tell me, how many times has your store been raided by police? Just the number of times your store has been raided by police officers.
Well, in the past,
Total.
The first store, which was Airedale Variety, that was the first store in which the raid started taking place. That store may have been raided 8 to 9 times.
Wow. And each time you're losing time because your store can't be open for business, you're losing product, you're losing customers because customers don't want to go into a store that's full of police officers. So you're losing a lot every time a police officer shows up or every time someone that's in a position of authority is seen going into your store. How much do you think this is impacting your bottom line? Not just how you feel about it, not the contribution you can give to the city, but how much is this affecting you as a business owner in Baltimore?
Well, it impacts me a lot. Again, like you said, financially, it impacts me. It stigmatized me in the community as if I'm doing something wrong. It keeps customers from coming to the store because who would want to come in and purchase a shirt or a hat? And they leave and then they're being pulled over by the cops or their door being kicked in. Exactly. In which that was occurring. They were following people from our store and raiding their homes.
That's terrible.
Yes, they were doing this. And again, it was so many times that it happened over and over. And the outcome was the same each time. There was really no convictions in which...
and the outcome was so obvious that you were actually able to win a lawsuit against the Baltimore City Police Department that showed that there was bias and harassment in the way they kept targeting you.
Our business was repeatedly targeted so many times in which we did show that pattern, the continuing pattern of them of the harassment and profiling in which we were awarded a settlement.
Right. And so I think what you're seeing is the business of policing at its most raw and how it interferes with other processes. Because these are, number one, these are plain clothes, which the department, which, you know, we've had terrible problems in the city with the Gun Trace Task Force, which is a group of 9 officers who robbed residents, dealt drugs, stole, you know, and it was a plainclothes unit. They go in there, They get their stat, they get their arrest, they get their, they say they did something productive, but here's where the crux is. It wasn't productive. There was nothing done there. There was no crime averted or something. Instead, all they did was sow chaos.
And to give us a sense of how policing is able to create this type of simplified narrative, we want to look at body cam footage that has been controversial and show how the media failed to ask a critical question. The footage shows a traffic stop by a Seminole County sheriff in Florida. The driver was Rocky Rudolph Jr., and he was pulled over for having tinted windows. Let's watch what happens.
Do me a favor. Do me a favor. I'm telling you right now. Stop! 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 Put it in park! Put your hands up! Put your freaking hands up! Seminole, you're just trying to take off with me. Step them up now. Sir, I'm telling you. Put your hands up. Put your hands up. Put your hands up. I swear to God. Put your hands up. You put it in park. Sir.
Media reported that Rudolph was a convicted felon and dragged the officer 100 feet. He was also shot by the deputy and is now in custody, facing attempted murder charges. So why would we want to talk about a case like this? Why even question what happened? It's a good question, and the answer is simple. Because we never take the time to question the reason for the stop in the first place. We never ask why it's necessary to waste police resources on tinted windows. So Sean, you've watched the video. You know these stories. What do you think?
Me being the African-American male here in the room,
Yes.
who have been in that same situation time and time and time again.
Right.
What do I personally think about it? I'll tell you what I think is that it comes down to the officer, the individual officer himself. How he views African American males, because it's usually us, the ones that mainly being at that receiving end of that bullet. And again, I personally just had a situation in which I was pulled over by a male Caucasian cop, in which it totally just took me by surprise, given the outcome of the whole situation. But what he chose to do was follow the law.
That's good to hear.
He followed the law. He didn't go beyond what the traffic stop was about. My license was suspended. Okay? I made an illegal U-turn.
Right.
Now, he could have pulled me out the car and searched the car because he did smell marijuana, in which I handed it to him and told him, yes, I was smoking. Now, if he would have searched the car, would he have found anything beyond the marijuana? No.
Right.
But if I was doing something wrong, it could have been a whole total different situation. Now, that situation there is an example of how the law is supposed to work evenly for everyone. For everyone. Now, 95% of the other times that I was pulled over by the cops, in which I was doing nothing at all to even be pulled over. Again, tinted windows. Recently just happened to me. I didn't make any illegal turns or anything. I even had out-of-state tags, in which, again, I had to even question myself, why did the officer pull me over? For a tint. You're a Maryland state officer.
Good point.
When did you become an expert in another state on their tent laws?
That's a good point.
But again, license, registration, everything was good. He let me go. But again, pulled over. License, registration, your tent. Step out the car. Yeah, step out the car, sir.
Oh.
For what? What I do? You pull me over from my tent. I'll let you know. Put your hands behind your back, sir.
Oh, I see. So it really does depend on
Sat
the
down here in the
individual.
gutter while I search your car.
Oof.
Now, that's been the other 90% of the time.
But it also comes down to the system that we've created.
Exactly.
It gives incentives to officers to make arrests, especially low-level drug arrests, which are simple, don't take a lot of investigation, just simple possession, this psychology of possession we have that infiltrates policing to the point where officers are incentivized to pull people over and search their cars because it's a lot easier than investigating a burglary or a murder, which remain unsolved. So it's a system that's incentivized this kind of behavior. And to me, from my perspective as a reporter, the people who suffer from it are people like Sean who get pulled over constantly.
Do you think that the officer in the case in the video cam piece of body cam that we showed had any right to pull his gun out on that young man?
No, I don't
Okay.
think. I don't think when you consider the consequences, you know, the saying when you talk to police officers is don't pull a gun out unless you plan to use it.
Right.
So once you pull that gun out, you know, you're saying I'm going to take your life. Because think about it, if you pull the gun out, immediately the person's fears for his life. So of course he's going to drive off or put his hand out.
Of course.
You can't de-escalate a gun. So you
Could
can't.
be a death sentence.
A gun is like is literally saying there's nothing else I can do except shoot you. And
Right.
what sense does that make? You're talking about an irrevocable decision to take someone's life on the spot. Why as a country do we tolerate that? Or do we say, that's okay, you felt a little bit of danger, so you can escalate to fatal force. The guy wasn't armed, he's just in his car. If he just stepped back and the guy drove off, get him later. It's not like they don't have his license. Why should someone die? And we have to ask that question over and over again, you know, until people stop shooting people. And of course, I'm a white male, so it's not as pressing for me as it is for like Sean, who is much more likely to be a victim of that.
Yes.
Well, I believe that they give officers too much leadway in which to get away with shooting someone.
Very true.
They give them too much time to get their story together.
Yes, the LEOBR allows them to do
Exactly, they give them too much time. And then the consequences is just...
They get extra pay, for example?
Right, you get time off with pay.
Yep.
You know, you get incentives for shooting someone.
Yes.
And then when you look at the outcome of most police shootings, when it comes to African Americans, they never convicted of these shootings when you clearly
Very
see
rarely
what happens
even
on
indicted for them.
camera. You know, so I just think that, you know, the culture of allowing them to get away with it is just, it's too far out there.
Yeah. Sean, thank you so much, and thank you, Stephen. Well, this certainly is a topic that we will continue to cover and discuss. I want to thank our guest, Sean Weston, for joining us today and sharing his personal experience. And I want to thank my host and producer, Stephen Janis, for joining us. And I want to thank you for joining me at the Police Accountability Report for the Real News Network.